bit more mature and a bigger product, digital product company. So without further ado, my name is Sonia Marilyn. I'm a senior user researcher at Zalando. I'm on the B2B side, so the business to business side, actually the first researcher on that side, and running my small, or leading my small research team there. A bit of my background, I have a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Lapland, actually in industrial design. So I'm a designer from original background, then Master of Arts from International Design Business Management from Aalto University, where I actually also worked with Paolo there. So that's my educational background. Like I said, I'm more from the design side of things, and then more and more went to the direction of service design, research, and eventually just user research. But at Zalando, we have people from different kind of backgrounds, and in research field in general, people come from a very variety of backgrounds. We can, for example, have cultural anthropology, sociology, cognitive science, human-computer interaction, or something totally different. As far as I know, there's not really specific formalized university trainings, for example, for research at the moment. So that is one of the reasons why people from different kind of backgrounds end up to this field, which is very interesting. So I'm currently working at Zalando, like I said, but before that, I've been working in a small startup owned by Lufthansa called Yilu, which was also in the B2B sector, working with travel, which was fun. Before that, I was many years at Fjord, which is a global design agency, working across a variety of industries on different kind of mostly strategic projects. I've been also working at Aalto University with Paolo, like I said. So in a couple of research teams there with Paolo, we were doing qualitative data analysis. So, and now I'm going to focus on more on the Zalando part. So for those of you, I saw that we have some people, for example, from Brazil. If you don't know about Zalando, it's the Europe's leading online platform for fashion and lifestyle. Our slogan is the starting point for fashion. So we are mostly operating in Europe, like Germany, France, Italy, Spain being the main markets that we have. And we have actually 35 million active customers, which is a lot for a product, which is an interesting product context. And we have more than 3,000 brands that we are offering on our platform. And we actually have around 420 million visits per month, which is a lot. And the brands that we have is ranges from international labels to local labels, which we are even increasing that range of it now. And as a Zalando as a whole, we have around 14,000 employees in Europe. And then that was about Zalando in general, but where I am at, I told you I'm actually on the B2B, so the business to business side of things. And there's multiple teams on that side, but my team is something called Zalando Direct. What we are doing, we are building a platform for fashion brands and retailers, which we call partners for us, who can then sell their products directly to the Zalando customers. So like you can see here, we have the partner portal, which is the product, the digital product that I'm working on, or our team is working on. So we enable fashion brands to upload their articles to the platform, to manage them, improve the sales, detect which items are selling, which are not, and then take actions based on that. So our platform is one of the platforms that partners can be using. There's different business models that we have, so it's a bit more complex than that. So that's why we have the Zalando in between. So there's different things that come in that we process and that we then put on the Zalando .fi or Zalando any other country ending that you have, that our customers can then shop. So what I am specifically talking about is now about the partner portal, and specifically the Zalando Direct team where I'm at. And as I will tell you a bit later, there's different ways of how we have set up research. So this is specific to my team. Just very, very briefly, one slide about why we do research. Most of you, or many of you, must have already seen this picture or this image about what happens in the real world almost, I would say, most of the time with our designs. So like you can see, we have a road here on the, or a street walk here on the left side. But what do people do? They cut the corner. So this is what usually happens. Users don't behave in the way that we expect them to behave. And with user research, we aim to understand behaviors of users, the behaviors and needs, the pain points, before we even start building something, so that we could avoid situations like this. Of course, sometimes even though we do research and we launch a product, this can still happen. There's also the famous quote from Henry Ford, who said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses instead of cars. And he then came up with cars. So something I want to mention also, that user research, we are there to understand the user's needs. So customers can easily describe a problem they are having, but they are not the best ones to tell what is the ideal solution. So that is our job then. Our job is to understand the customers or the users, their pain points and behaviors, and then come up with the best solution to cater for that. Then a bit more about the research setup at Zalando. So because the customer facing side is much more mature, we have also a much bigger team there. So the team is called Voice of Customer team, and we have around 20 people in that team currently. We have both qualitative researchers, quantitative researchers. We have a customer satisfaction team where we have actually analysts, and then we also have newly established research operations team, or actually team of one at the moment. And next to this setup, that is more on the customer facing side of Zalando, we have something called embedded researchers. So these are individual researchers who are located in different other parts of the organization, in many cases on the B2B side of the organization. And me, I'm from this perspective, I'm one of the embedded researchers, but what is happening, actually, we are building our own team as well in my Zalando Direct team. So I have another qualitative researcher with me, and then we have also our own research operations person, and eventually we'll be growing on that side as well. So first of all, I would like to give a bit of an overview of how research is happening in our product development process. So this is how we are kind of defining to ourselves and to all our stakeholders how can research help us. So first of all, we have the generative phase. We are defining this as a generative phase since which is before the problem definition phase, because we are looking into problems or even problem spaces without having defined a specific problem yet. These are typically very strategic research projects on a certain topic. For example, could be understanding customer online shopping behavior. So we don't have at this point a very specific problem that we want to solve. Then when we have been looking into that space, usually this is a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods. We go to the problem definition phase. So in this phase, we have one specific problem that we want to look more deep into. For example, from the first generative phase, we could have learned that it's hard to find the right fit of clothing when I'm shopping online. So then if needed, we can run another phase of research to look more into detail of this specific problem and what's the context around it and what goes with it. And this can be similarly both a mix of quantitative and qualitative methods. After that, when we have defined that this is really the problem that we want to solve, this is a problem that is worth of solving, the team goes into the solution design phase. This can be, first of all, there's ideation, then there's concept creation, and then there's concept validation. So you can validate really concepts against each other, something we call sacrificial concepts, or you can even just validate your early designs at this stage. And this stage is usually more qualitative. On the phase 3 is then when we have decided on the concept, we might have already the early designs for it, and we go to the detailed design phase. So we can be doing, for example, usability testing, either in a qualitative manner, so the number of tests is smaller, or we can go really quantitative and even do beta testing with a certain amount of users. So really to identify potential bugs, for example, in the product before we go to launch. And then, of course, the phase 4, which is maintenance and operations. So we are monitoring how does the product perform. So we have in situ feedback collection. So these small, usually you see on a website, the small feedback widget. So this, for example, or in our case, on the bottom of the page, there's often rate something, or there's a question that you're supposed to answer. So we are continuously monitoring this. There's also our customer satisfaction survey that our CSAT team is looking at. And of course, the product teams are also looking at the product analytics. So roughly speaking, we can divide research into discovery research and then evaluative research. So basically it goes throughout the product journey. In comparison to some people or some stakeholders, sometimes thinking that research is only the generative phase or the problem definition phase. But in reality, it actually goes throughout the product development process. And then just to mention, the way that we usually also do this is when we are working with product teams, it's something called Tri-Track Agile, or you can look into InVision has the report about it. So discovery and early concept definition stages run a bit in front of the product development, so actually development. And but usually designers are both working simultaneously on the discovery phase or the part, and they are then informing the developers about the detailed designs. So that's roughly how it happens in practice. So then in Zalando Direct specifically, so those were the different stages where we can do research. And basically you run a process of research within each of the stages. We have two different types of research, or let's say it's been structured in two different ways. So we have our own research team. We conduct ourselves very strategic research phase projects. So these are more on the generative part of research. But next to that, since we are only 2 people plus the research ops person, it's impossible to cater for all the research needs that our product teams have. So for example, I am dealing with 12 product teams. So in order not to make research as the bottleneck for those teams, we are actually enabling our teams to do their own research. So this is something we call democratizing research. I'm a big fan of it, but there's of course ways that it can get really wrong. But I'm here to explain you a bit how we are doing it and how we are trying to make sure that teams are enabled and ready to conduct their own research, and that the quality of the results is also on the standard that we want. So this is the research program that we run next to our strategic research. So it's a process that our research teams or our product teams go through with us. There's different levels of this. So support, so we can have a low level of support for very simple topics, or usually usability testing for teams who have already conducted research in the past, so they are much more mature in that sense. So there we are supporting less. Whereas then if we have more complex topics or teams who have just started research, we are there as a research team supporting them a bit more. And how this basically goes is that we start from the alignment and preparation. This means that especially if it's a discovery phase, we are there for the team. We have an alignment meeting with them, to which the team prepares with a research brief, and they come and we discuss the research and do all kind of preparations that it goes into it. With usability testing, with the more mature teams, we skip this part totally, so we don't do it together. But they do it on their own. After the alignment, after we understand what are the research questions we actually want to solve for, what are our research goals, what type of partners we should be talking about. So we have already decided also the sample and our target group. So then our research team, so our research coordinator actually does the scheduling of the partner sessions for the teams. After this, the teams are in charge of conducting research by themselves. We can do the analysis together. So if it's a less experienced team, I can be facilitating the analysis session, the final analysis session with the team. And after that, the team is asked to share their findings to the rest of the teams. These are roughly the steps that our teams go through when they do research. And here are some tools or support props that we are using during this process. So on alignment and preparation, I would say this is one of the most important phases of research, because here you define what you're going to do, what are you going to look into, so research goals, research questions, and that kind of defines everything that comes after. I will be talking about our challenges later on, but one of the challenges that we have is that our teams are very excited to conduct research. So there's requests of all kinds. And like I said, we have limited resources, so we cannot always cater for all those needs. On the other hand, teams can come up with research questions that cannot be answered by research at all. Or sometimes there are cases where it's obvious that we should be building something and research is not even necessarily needed. So that's why we are using something called the hypothesis canvas or hypothesis prioritization canvas, and where the teams are allowed to put themselves, they prioritize the hypothesis. So are these things we really want to put effort to research into? Is this something that from the business perspective, we know already that we have to build, and maybe there's no need for discovery research at all? Or maybe this is something that we shouldn't be even building at all. So we are really recommending our teams to use this before they start to go in the research. Other thing is to look into if we already have information on this topic. So for that, we have something called the research repository. So we have a repository of all the research that we have conducted in the past. They can go through the main findings of those research reports and find links to the detailed raw data as well if needed. And our teams are supposed to look into this. They're supposed to also do some secondary research, so within stakeholders, for example, to understand if this is something we actually already know before starting to initiate another research project. And Based on this is something the teams do themselves. We have a research roadmap, so I have quarterly discussions with our product teams to understand what kind of needs they are anticipating for the quarter, so we can do some kind of prioritization within ourselves. When do we intake which project? So there's a research roadmap, which is mainly a tool for me, and then there's the research brief. So when we have the alignment meeting, our teams are supposed to fill in the research brief as the best as they can. For that, the research brief will include the research goals. It will include the context. So what is the user problem we want to solve, or the space that we want to look into? What is the existing research that has been done? If there's a specific target group that we want to look into, timelines and so forth. We will be looking into that together, and then we will be doing the scheduling for the teams. So like I said, we have a research operations person who does the reach out. We have a preliminary version of a partner panel. So a directory of all the brands that we have, the contact details, when did they take part in the research earlier, because we don't want to also overwhelm them by contacting them too much. We are doing a new version of this sooner than later, but this is pretty important if you want to do research in scale. After that, we have conducting research phase. We have interview guide for the research team if it's an interview that we decided. So of course, in the research brief, we also decide the methods that we are going to use for that specific research. And if we are doing one-on-one interviews, for example, we have an interview guide for the teams that they can use. It also includes some basic information and instructions how to conduct the interviews. We have a testing guide with success rate that the teams can use really easily, and a note-taking template that, for example, has timestamps and recording in it, so teams can always go back to the recording and get the specific quotes from them. In the analysis phase, we have a download template. So we are using actually Mural at the moment, because we are encouraging not only the product manager and the designer take part of the research, but also the engineers or other stakeholders. Like we have bigger operational stakeholders, operational teams, so they often want to be part of research as well. So we have found out that Mural is actually a nice way to do analysis in a collaborative way. Teams are requested to do a download after each interview, if we talk about the interviews, and then we do a final analysis in the end, where we go through all the data they have. We are identifying the emerging themes from them. So we are doing an affinity mapping exercise and then drawing conclusions from there. And then another very important phase that we have is then sharing, because the problem is, of course, that sometimes, especially the more mature you become as a research team or as an organization, the more and more you have existing research data. This means that something might have been already researched before. That's why we have the research repository as well. But in order to increase the understanding even more and increase the sharing of knowledge, we have defined that our teams need to present their findings to the other product teams who are building on the platform. And so this is a bi-weekly meeting where I have a presentation template where they can fill in the research questions, what was tested, if there was a prototype, for example, what were the findings specifically to the topic, but also findings that are relevant cross-platform. And this is a really, really nice way that I've learned to how we can share and increase the knowledge within our teams or across our teams. My last slide, or second last slide, some of the challenges that we have had, I mentioned before. So we are only 2 people or 2.5 people at the moment, and we have many product teams. So there's way more requests than we can handle. This is also on the voice of customer side, so the customer facing side. And this is actually a pretty nice problem to have. So many times You might be, especially if you're the first UX designer, even in an organization, you might have to explain to stakeholders why UX research is needed. But we have the opposite problem. Our stakeholders are so enthusiastic about research that they would want to research absolutely everything all the time. So we are struggling with this, and of course the team needs to scale, but this is the reason why we are also trying to support our own product teams to do the research in the best way that we can. Another challenge that we as a research team have is that our research product teams are often focusing on very small problems, or they lack to take the perspective of the whole platform. So for example, if we are talking about a topic, a filter for example, time picker. So how can our partners see data on flexible time filters on the platform? So one team might look that into from their perspective, but because we have different pages on the site, it might be actually applicable to other cases as well. And then we would want to look at it on the whole platform perspective. There's also much more complex and bigger topics like this. So most of my time actually goes into when we are in the alignment phase of things, to discussing with teams, is this really the thing you want to learn, or is it actually part of a bigger problem that you should be looking into? Because otherwise, if we start narrow, we end up doing so many small projects, then understanding different things. Whereas if we did one bigger one in the beginning, so-called front-loading research, you would have then already information for multiple things you can do following that. Then as a research team, and I believe many researchers are struggling with this, we are too reactive, in my opinion, instead of being proactive. So like I said, we are flooded with requests. So often we are just trying to react to those. Whereas what we are trying for is to really look into our findings in general, or these more strategic topics in general, and identify topics ourselves that should be researched on, and do this front loading of topics. So something that we can look into, learn from, and then the many product teams can take that on and then start to design based on that. And I'm curious to hear other your challenges and also the other questions. As my last slide, we are hiring always, but since we are in a UX Hell meeting, we are hiring especially in Helsinki. So we have qualitative researcher position open there, or mixed method with focus on qualitative. And we also have multiple design positions open in Helsinki. So if you're located in Helsinki, please check these out. Zalando in general, unfortunately, doesn't support fully remote roles. So you need to be located in one of these locations, Berlin, Helsinki, or Dublin, if you want to apply to us. But I highly recommend to apply. So that's about it. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Very interesting insights that you share, and it's actually quite insightful to hear how structured you are in your work. And it's also quite nice that that the entire team believes in your efforts in the company, and it kind of supports you always into that. So very interesting to know that this is the case for Zalando. We do have actually we do have quite some questions we have gathered here, and maybe we can start. We have a question from Peter. How often do researchers need to speak Finnish or German at Zalando? So related to language, are there any language barriers over here?
So on the customer facing side, we have different markets. So I think our research is currently conducted in English. On the partner facing side, so with the fashion brands, we are conducting it in English. So we don't have, even in the job requirements, we don't have specifically Zalando or German or native language in most cases. So English should be okay. But of course, in cases when we can, we cater for the language, the local language of the user or the partner. So we, for example, have some Spanish speakers or French speakers or German speakers.
All right. And also from Peter, is there an interest in native English speakers to combine UX with communications work? Peter, if you can maybe kindly mention here what you wanted to say by it, or what was the exact question by mentioning?
No, you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, no, it comes from, I talked to an American who worked at Scope over there, which is a firm, and he was talking about, yeah, I mean, he was talking because his path had kind of combined UX, UI stuff with communications stuff, in the sense of like just, writing and editing if stuff needs to be in, like good English, like if you're a writer and editor as well. And so he was talking about, combining those roles. So that's kind of where it comes from.
So was the question if we have a role for this, or?
Oh yeah, like if there's an interest in, like, I don't know, like in addition to UX, UI stuff, like English, like writing and editing, like if, like, I don't know if people on the team's native languages are other than English, like, I don't know.
Yes, so we have UX writer positions actually. So we have specific people to deal with the copy and everything. And we, of course, we use programs to then, or we use Localize to manage the different translations, but there's of course a native translator for all our copy and content. On the partner facing side, we are not there yet. So we are actually still in English, but we'll go there as we mature in the future. And definitely you can do research for the copy and content as well, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to the next ones. Thank you for clarifying those. We have one from actually Margarita. In the B2B world, how do you recruit partners to interview or involve in the research? When are you agreeing with them to join the research program, and are your sales team collaborating with you in the process?
Good question. This is the ever challenging topic on the B2B side. We are very lucky in our case, in the sense that our brands are quite eager to work with us, because the more they help us to build the product, the more they will sell, basically. So we are very lucky that they have even contacted us to give feedback. We have a contact point, so we have an account manager to many of the brands, or some kind of contact point and contact details to all of our brands. So we can basically contact any of them. And actually the response rate, the interest to take part to research is very high in our case. We are currently doing, since the scale of on our side is a bit lower still, we are doing a manual reach out. So we are email, because we have found out that this is actually the best way to contact them and get a response at the moment. So yes, basically email based.
Sonia, sorry, can I elaborate? I'm very interested in this. Do you have like access to like all your clients, and you just shoot the emails to them, or you choose a selection and you just contact them directly without any sort of barrier? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we are very lucky. We don't have a barrier to contact them.
Okay.
But we are working closely with the account management team. So all the partner-facing teams that we have elsewhere in the organization, we have a document where they have an overview, and they are always informed when partners which partners get contacted and when. And what was I going to say? Yes, so
what about the consent?
Content. So legal part on our side, we are still working on it.
Okay.
So we have a business contract with the partners, which already covers this type of activities. But we are aware that we should become a bit more mature on this side as well. So we might be adding separate content also to, for example, to be able to record and so forth. What comes to targeting partners, that's of course based on the sample criteria. So depending on the topic, method, and so forth, we have a certain criteria for certain research always, and based on that, we then select the partners that fit into that criteria.
Yeah,
and that's why we also need the partner panel to be able to filter them out easily.
Thank you.
That's wonderful to hear. Let's go to the next one. This one is also from
maybe
Peter.
Super quickly to add. So we are actually not incentivizing even our partners. No, that's we are so lucky. But in some cases we have now started. So survey responses are very low. So in those cases we have started to offer some incentives. For example, discounts on the services that they pay for Zalando. And that's been pretty effective as well. So if you have any chance to give incentives in the B2B context, like in the customer context as well, always helps recruit.
All right. The next one, the difference between the product in research and strategic research is that the product involves partner sessions or moderated tasks or interviews. Question from Peter, mainly what's the difference, I think, between the product team and the strategic research? If I understood correctly, Peter, feel free to mention this in more detail.
I think I can also answer how I understand it. So product teams are often looking at the specific part of product they are focusing on. So our product teams are focusing on different parts of the product. In the customer facing side, maybe easier to understand, for example, checkout would be one, product detail page would be one team. In some organizations, you might have mobile separate from desktop teams. So these teams are looking very specific part of the product, whereas then our job is to look more into some cross-platform topics or things that are not even tied into the platform specific, but really understanding the processes, the workflows, the people working at the partner side. For example, one topic now has been retention. So why are certain brands dropping off from the platform, for example? So this is the division.
All right. Few other questions that we undertake going forward. So there are actually similar ones related to the templates that you mentioned. So the hypothesis canvas, note-taking template, as well as the analysis phase template from Mural. Would you be able maybe to kindly share with us maybe after the event, or we can send to our participants as well, so that they can also see a glance of what it is to have such a template?
So I would have to see if I can share as such.
Of course.
The prioritization canvas can be found from the internet, so that I can definitely share the link for it. But let's see, I can check what I can do with the other templates. So unfortunately, I cannot promise that I can necessarily share them as such.
All right, understandable, no worries. If you have just a couple of words about them, that would still be very useful for us. from Pekka, is there a designer in each product team, and how do you ensure the level of quality of perform research when there are non-experts performing the interviews or other methodologies?
Very good question. So that's something I didn't talk about too much, but with new teams, so teams that haven't done research before, or when I've been in the team, so I've been actually just 1 year in the summer. We first of all, I have an intro session with them to user research in general, how we run, how our processes are. Then there's the point of contact with the research brief and the alignment. So there we look at the research goals, the research questions, the methodology and everything. So I have a chance to influence. Then for teams who actually didn't conduct research before, I give some explanation on that as well. We have trainings specifically. So we have actually a freelancer at the moment who organizes the different models of training. So we have how to create a research brief and a research study in general, how to conduct usability testing. In the future, hopefully we will have interviewing techniques training. Next to that, I'm also offering to conduct the first session for the team. So the team is observing and I'm conducting, or my research partner is conducting it. And then for the next session, we swap around. So the team is conducting and I'm observing and then giving feedback. So these kind of, and then I'm part of the analysis also with the less experienced teams. So these are the checkpoints where we try to improve the quality and make sure that that we are actually learning the things that the teams are saying we are learning, because quality of research, the challenge is that you can often interpret the learnings in the way that you want, or you can get in an interview the things out that you want to hear. So yes, very, very important to have those quality checks in place.
Thanks, Sonia, very interesting.
All right, let's head to the last question, maybe. I'm conscious also of the time. There's a question from Lisa. Even when delegating research to the product team, can research keep up with the product team's pace or sprints?
So this is one of the reasons also why we have the strategic research a bit separate from the product team research. So the teams themselves are in charge of managing the sprints and how does design and research go with the product development process. So we are working in two-week sprints as well, so that then teams need to handle it themselves, so that the discovery and the more detailed research goes in there. But then we are, of course, we are decoupled from that process, we as a research team. So we are much more enabled to conduct this kind of more bigger research topics. Of course, the teams can do like a research spike or something and say that they want to take a bit more time to research next to the development sprints.
All right, conscious of the time, so we do have a few other questions. Would you be okay if maybe we can send them to you, and we can then share with the community if you are able to answer after the event, just so that we are indeed answering the community's question, if that's okay for you, of course.
Yes, I see there's a lot of good questions, so thank you for those.
Yes, indeed, and even more that are in the chat that unfortunately due to the time constraints we weren't able to actually ask. So thank you all who posted questions in the chat and who are being so active to ask more from Sonia. We'll try to do our best to answer them with Sonia's help. All right, Sonia, thank you so much for your time and very cases, the whole research processes that you have at Zalando. It was very insightful to know. And I kindly welcome now our next speaker, Akseli Antila. Akseli, are you here?
Yes, I am.
All
Can you hear
right.
me?
Yes, very well.
I suppose you can also see my slides.
Correct.
Excellent. Anyway, I can't see you, but I can see the chat and everything. So anyway, excellent talk by Sonia. My talk will be from a slightly different point of view. It's more of a designer's kind of a guerrilla research kind of talk. So not quite as structured processes necessary as Sonia's excellent work. Anyway, bit about my background. So I work at Yle at the moment. I've been there for 8 months. Before that, I've been doing quite a bit of different kinds of UX research, UX design in various companies. Actually, my first project was a research project called www.nokia.com. So in '95, the internet was still a research topic on internet services. So I've done quite a few things about digital design. I worked at Nokia for quite some time as a consultant for quite a bit at Rovio, at Elisa, past couple of years at Varjo, the augmented reality company, and now at Yle. And I've done a lot of different projects. So if we look at the design framework, this is a good old school double diamond process where you first define the problem and then you define the best way to solve the problem. In reality, it's not like that. The main criticism for the double diamond is that it's linear, but in actual fact, whenever you do something, you do a solution, the setting changes and you need to sort of figure out what's the implication of this design that you made, because it had a different impact on your users' practices than the situation was when you started. So anyway, so research to me is a fundamental.
I'm good, and you? Oh, sorry, I need to change the screen, so I'm looking at you.
So please mute if you're not the speaker. Thank you. Okay, anyway, so research to me is a fundamental part of design work. Although if you're not a trained researcher, you need to understand your limitations, and I certainly do understand my limitations. So during my career, I've worked a little bit in the initial kind of finding problems worth solving kind of areas, a bit more in the creating ideas and concepts, and probably majority is the kind of like, how should we solve this problem, and kind of trying out different solutions, and not that much in the final kind of production design work. So that's my background. So let's talk about a few cases to illustrate what kind of research you do as a designer. Okay, the first case is a Nokia case from a while back, but I think it's still relevant. It's about what do you do, or how would you go about figuring out what are the kind of physical gestures you should use to control a device. My colleague Ang Hee Jong and myself were the lead designers, and we had a fairly large design team doing this in London. So this is very much a design or business-driven problem. So we needed to create the principles of gesture interaction that would be applicable to the whole product portfolio. Define when gestural interaction would be cool, and provide examples. So this is very much a large product portfolio and creating some kind of universal language to support the portfolio. So how did we go about doing that then? So first, because we were designers, we had a lot of like contextual body storming and other kind of ideation of, hey, this would be a cool way to do this. We had an understanding of, based on research, of what people actually do with their phones, is what kind of tasks we should explore, like how do you silence a phone in a church, or how do you share files in a bar, or stuff like that. And then the questions of why do we think this is a good way to do it. Then the next part was to expose our designs, so document our ideas, and then do focus groups in multiple countries of what do people think about that. I am not a particular fan of focus groups because the group dynamics influence the kind of information you get out of the interview session. But in this case, it works because gestural interaction is a performative act. And then the fact that there are multiple people present actually gives you better quality results from the interview. Again, the question is, why did these people say this? You always need to go try and get behind the kind of obvious answer. I wonder why they are saying that. The next stage was basically we iterated our designs and came up with a kind of a limited set of gestures to try out. And then we tested those out with again with users, created fast prototypes, actual fast prototypes, and that you could test in a lab setting. So first we asked people to show how they would do that task, and then we exposed our idea. Well, what about this idea? And then try to understand why they answer the way they do. And then we created final documents, the final work, because of what we had understood. So what did we get out of this work? First, we got the design principles of because the people liked certain gestures and didn't like other gestures. This gave us kind of like an understanding of what kind of things are important to people, kind of design principles, and also some checklists, like if you're going to design a gesture, what do you need to keep in mind? So this is the kind of level of deliverable. If you design stuff, keep this in mind because the people have these needs, wants, and limitations. So did this have any impact? Or how do you get impact? Because this is a strategic design project, like do this kind of stuff overall throughout the company. So how do you make sure that any of your work has any impact? Then you can argue about the business value of your work. So what is the monetary value? Is this increased sales, efficiency, customer acquisition, customer retention, blah, blah, blah. If everything else fails, you can always say, oh, it increases our brand value and recognition, which is a really kind of weak argument, but still usable if nothing else works. In order for any of your arguments to have any impact, you need to make sure that you have some sponsors in the boardroom. So try to get already from the beginning of your research and design project, some C-level sponsors for your work. And then the most important thing is that when you do this kind of really high-level stuff, then you have to make sure that you get the people who have to do your work, implement it. They are already part of the project from the beginning. One fun method that we used, we called it context cinema. So because we actually had a prototype we made ourselves, and it was a bit of a fragile piece of work. We couldn't go out into the real context, so we tried to fake the context in the lab as much as possible. For example, projecting videos of the environment where this is supposed to take place, to at least to some extent get the kind of user into the right mindset of, oh, this is the place where I'm doing it. So that was good fun. These kind of strategic design projects from a designer's point of view are super cool and super interesting. And if you make sure that they are based on the reality of the users you want to reach, then it's a good project. But that was design stuff. That wasn't really solving any real problems in the world, to be honest. So the next case is trying to solve a real problem. So this was in Elisa, my colleague Vesa Härkönen and myself. We were doing an internal startup called FlexiWork. So this was trying to address a societal problem. Senior citizens lack meaning in their lives. So when you're retiring, it will be a huge disruption on your entire life. And we wanted to understand what are the main problems there and how could we solve them, and could it be a service opportunity for Elisa. Elisa is a Finnish telco operator, one of the largest. So what did we do? First of all, the problem came from this large ethno work that was done to kind of figure out the situation of the lives of these senior citizens. I wasn't part of that work, but the work I was involved in was the result of analyzing which of these issues are the most critical. So what we did was we did a lot of service ideation. So what kind of service could we build? And analyzing the work ethno results, interviewing a lot of domain experts, and then we basically formed hypotheses of this is the need we should do. And then we started prototyping. Really fast prototypes, paper mock-ups, and eventually online mock-ups. So in a way, fake services. And basically, we were trying to understand that if you have a value proposition of here's a service that allows you to find NGO work or volunteering work, would you be interested in? Why do you want to sign up? Always the question, why? That's something that you need to try and understand. We conducted interviews one-to-one. We engaged a kind of like motivated group of lead users. I think some of them were already part of the initial ethno. So this is kind of a longer term relationship with some users. And then we of course had a lot of web surveys and looked at web analytics when we eventually started having kind of like these running service propositions. And then basically we change the value proposition or change the kind of like communication and then go back, rinse and repeat. In the space of 5 months, I think we did 5 iterations of what the service is doing. A fun research method is what I here call the growth hacking stuff. So basically the normal online quick rapid testing of you launch a service, you see if your advertising gets any clicks and that kind of stuff. So in addition to that, we had an online community in Facebook, and we could really quickly get some feedback of what about this alternative or that alternative, or would you do this or would you do that? And that was a lot of fun. And what did we learn? So it's really, as a designer or a researcher, whenever you are thrown into a new situation, which is something that designers all the time get to do, you have absolutely no idea about this topic. So do the desk studies, do the literature studies, and talk to the experts who are working already in the field to get kind of a jump start on what this thing is all about. So it's really fast and easy to do a kind of like test your value proposition online. You create Instagram ads, Google AdWords ads, Facebook stuff, and you test. And it's really difficult because you're not just testing your value proposition, you're actually testing how good you are in creating advertising. And for example, for a long time, we had a problem like, why is it that women are much more interested in our service than men? And then we did some advertising with a slightly younger than the target group, blonde female in the picture, and we started getting a lot of more interest from men. So some of these things are quite removed from the real problem that you're trying to figure out. So it can be a bit messy. Also, if you form this long-term kind of relationship with your lead users and have this community of users, they are starting to get tainted. So don't rely on only the people who know you really well. You need to get fresh blood into this situation. It's the age-old kind of thing that people want to please you, and the better they know you, the more they can please you. They are not lying consciously, but they just want to be nice and good subconsciously. Okay, the main failure of this project was that we were dead keen on understanding the end user problems and the customer problems, the consumer problems. And eventually we understood that really well. We understood quite well what kind of a service proposition would solve the problems of these people through this continuous iteration. And we didn't pay more attention to the problems on the other side, i.e. who's going to provide these opportunities to the senior citizens. We should have spent much more time on that part of the equation, because it is a two-part relationship that we are trying to foster. And don't forget to understand who are the actors in your system, and try to understand the needs and problems of all those parties. And then you can have a functioning system in the end. One really important thing, regardless of the topic, regardless of the domain, when you want to communicate the results of your research, it's really important to use visuals, photos, videos about the reality of life that these users have. Because the decision makers, your bosses, your clients, probably don't live that kind of life. And all this kind of rich visual information as part of your research report can be a really powerful tool. Also, tools like a day in the life of my customer, that kind of stuff is important to tell stories. Okay, and then also, if you are a man in your 60s, you really should get friends who are not part of your work life. The main problem that people have, there are two main problems if we talk about this substance, the domain here. First of all, a lot of people's social relationships are revolve around their work, and you really need to expand before you retire. And secondly, it's so unfair that the next day after your retirement, suddenly your professional skills have no meaning at all. It's like that. And that is something that society should also take into account, as people have transferable skills or kind of really good skills. But anyway, be prepared. You're young people, but when you're starting to approach the retirement age, be prepared. It's a massive change in your life. Okie doke. So, third case, Elisa Word, another societal problem with my colleague Leila Nasib and myself being the lead designers. What was the societal problem we were trying to solve? Youth illiteracy and illiteracy are a real problem. Illiteracy means that people can read, but it's difficult, but they don't. They're not interested in reading, and because they don't read, their skills go down. So this is a universal problem in Europe. Up to 1 in 5 15-year-olds have problems reading, and it's particularly visible in males, and it's a direct impact on their quality of life. So this is a real problem that needs solving. Again, this was an opportunity for Elisa to look for maybe creating services that could solve this problem. So what did we do? So first of all, this actually came as a marketing project in a way, because every year Elisa tries to raise awareness of some problem in society and foster discussion. And they came to us and said, hey, you researchers and designers, you're really good in doing kind of co-creation stuff. So could you organize kind of a workshop in our flagship store? And we said, yeah, sure, we could, but we actually want to also figure out a solution to this problem, whether this could be a real service, a real solution, not just kind of like a discussion, awareness raising thing. So we started doing real service design. Again, we need to understand the problem. So go to the people who understand, and then you can kind of like frame what is the problem you're trying to solve. The main research method we used this time was the co-creation workshops. We are trying to get information from the target group of what is their life, and get them to give us ideas of how they would solve this problem. Because we were old geezers, we were not living the life of a 14 to 16 to 18-year-old. So we needed to get them information from them. Okie doke. So then we created, based on the ideas, we kind of created viable service ideas, and then we figure out how do we measure which of these would work, and then we did the growth hacking stuff. basically we did a lot of different ways to see how do these concepts and the resulting services we created, how do they resonate in the target group, which is basically like online metrics and that kind of quantitative data. So fun method, co-creation. This problem was originally pitched to us as young men don't know how to read well enough to create to write a job application. That was kind of a problem setting, young men. But you cannot design for men only. You need to design, especially nowadays, when the kind of the distinction between gender roles is so lower than in the past. You need to design for young people if you're going to design for young men anyway. And also you need to do these sessions with different kinds of people from different parts of the country, from different backgrounds. So don't just do a few co-creation sessions, try to do a lot of them with a representative group of participants. Whenever you're running a co-creation session, the more props you can give to the people, the better, but also remember that the whole idea is creation, so be prepared to go off on a tangent or create more stuff. And always snacks. Sugar equals creativity. So what did we learn? Yes, you really need to understand the expert. Get tapped into the brains of the experts whenever you approach a new problem. Co-creation is rewarding, but make sure that you have enough insight based on several sessions. And growth hacking is fun, but you really need to understand what is it that I'm trying to test here. So always figure out, we had a fairly rigorous kind of like, these are our hypotheses, how do we test them, and did we get a result? So this kind of lean UX stuff was quite important to us. Impact. We didn't get any services out of this because typically in a large company when you work, there are different metrics by which any project is judged, should we proceed or not. And in this case, for various reasons, it was decided not to ramp this up. So we didn't actually solve this problem by creating a new service. However, your research, what you do can have a massive impact. So when we were doing the kind of like main workshop in the flagship store, one of the teams was a group of young men from I actually don't know what it is in English, but basically like almost like a special needs class. So guys who have real problems at school, and their teacher was there because they were minors, so they had to have an adult there present who was just observing from the corner what's going on. After the session, this teacher came to us with literally with tears in her eyes, saying that she has never seen these guys concentrate on anything. And that was mainly because in this session, we approached them like fully kind of like empowered adults. They were the designers. They were the people who we were just helping, facilitating the session, but we took them as peers in the session. So these guys were concentrating for the first time in something really serious and creating good stuff. Okay, a few months later, I was there's an annual kind of book fair in Helsinki, and I was in a panel talking about this project with other people who try to deal with the problem. And after the panel, the teacher approached me again and asked, "Oh, how are you doing? I said, how are the guys?" And she said me that there were two young men in that group who the teachers were sure wouldn't pass their class, so they would be left behind, they would be dropouts. But after the workshop, these guys actually started getting interested in schoolwork and actually managed to get to the next stage. So as a researcher, the act of working with people can actually have a massive impact and save, in our case, in my case, the only time I've actually probably saved somebody's life by doing research. So, thank you. That was my part.
Wow, I loved everything, but the ending was really, really inspiring and moving for all of us. So thank you very much for sharing this, that even in these challenging situations, or even if we don't see an impact, or if the business maybe doesn't consider that an impact or whatsoever, that still provides value to people. So that was amazing to share. Thank you very much for these stories.
Thank you.
What to say after that? We do have some questions from the audience, and the first one that I will take now is from Margarita, and she's asking, could you give more ideas on how you would go about getting the support in the boardroom for your research projects, especially when you work in an organization when there is quite a way between UX and boardroom? So mostly related to the first project that you shared, how do you actually get the board to help you in your projects?
Okay, it entirely depends on the kind of structure of the company. What is the kind of, probably you need to go through the kind of line of command in a way to find out who are the people who are close or who can introduce to you. But generally, this applies to almost everybody. Generally, people are quite open to talk to you if you approach them with a, I want to solve your problems kind of angle. Like, hey, we are doing this kind of research and we want to understand how our work can help you in your daily work, the decisions you have to make, and we need to understand that. So that angle is a good way to open doors. And another thing is that another really important part of this kind of power dynamics in boardrooms is that the worst thing you can do is surprise people in the board meeting. So if it's a good idea to, before you start doing work, talk to people individually, one-to-one, and try to understand what makes them tick or what they are afraid of. And somehow build this trust that, yes, you are doing work that actually helps them. Also and have this kind of like heartbeat going. And it is difficult because you also, another thing that sometimes happens, that if you're doing something that is seen as important, you start getting these people who have no mandate, but are really trying to gather towards the honeypot that they see. So how do you fight them off that they don't influence your work? But try to build trust that you are trying to solve the boardroom members' problems. That helps open doors.
Mm-hmm. Also related to this, because I think it goes hand in hand, a question from the audience. I find it's amazing. Elisa was interested to explore the seniority dimension. How come that the telecom company went about understanding seniors' life meaning? How this came to life? Where was the need coming from? And I think it's related also, like, how do you get senior management to care about seniors when you're a telecommunications company?
Okay. So Elisa is a multi-business organization in the sense that it cannot really grow in its old core business, because if it grew any larger, it would reach dominant status in the market, and they would be looked at much more closely by the government in a way. So they have to find new business opportunities. And basically, that's why they were looking into what kind of new business opportunities we could have in all the kind of consumer segments that we have. And because a good service solves a real problem, then that's why they were looking at each segment and find what are the real problems here. And that's why this eventual thing came out. But basically, it's like looking for growth opportunities and trying to understand what are the particular opportunities in any particular user segment.
I think, sorry, it's a bit like the generative research that Sonia was mentioning.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, makes sense. Then the next one is actually, I was interested in knowing more about getting other interesting users to research, because there are all these parts that are intersecting with each other, right? We don't have only our end users. We also have, maybe we have to think about people that actually implement our service, our ideas, and so on. So I think there's this stakeholder mapping that can get quite tricky. How, of course, in reality, how can you make it happen, and so that at the end you're not only researching your end users, but you get a bit of more broad aspect of this? How do you actually get to also involve them in your process within a time limit? Because of course, in any project, in any research, you do also have timing constraints. If you can give any advice about this, that would be great.
Well, what you said about the stakeholder mapping, is something that you should start doing quite quickly. And basically understanding which are all the different people who are critical for the success, and basically prioritize eventually, like look at people who can say no, and try to understand those people quite well. And also and it is really difficult, as you said, because the stakeholder mapping helps you understand the different values that people place, or the different problems and hurdles that people say. For example, typically in B2B environment, you have to sell a product to somebody. And sometimes if you solve the buyer's problem, you can sell the product, but the actual user of the product has completely different needs. And that's why all big systems are complete crap. So.
Indeed.
But stakeholder mapping, so try to understand the extent of the system and then start figuring out who are the ones who are really critical nodes in that map.
All right. Going forward, a few other questions from the audience. From Pekka, we have, especially on B2B side, the role of lead users can be very valuable. How would you balance that out so that the lead user feedback doesn't direct or bias the product that much?
I don't have a direct answer because I mostly have a problematic kind of experience with that, but possibly Sonia or somebody who has more kind of like experience in longer term relationships. Probably you would need to figure out what is the kind of a lifespan, when does something kind of like go sour, and you just basically cycle through a certain number of users. That could be one approach, but honestly, I haven't done it myself that much, so I don't know.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Any tips for getting domain experts to help you, or how do you actually recruit the domain experts themselves to kind of speed up a bit the
again,
process?
it depends. So it depends on what the domain is. In some cases, it's quite easy. You just pick up a phone and call a suitable NGO. Like in our case, it's really simple, both in the literature case and in the seniors. It's just, you just, oh, let's call the Red Cross because they do. Oh, let's call the church or whatever, because you know that they are involved in this activity. In B2B, it can be sometimes a little bit more problematic because you have these layers of secrecy or otherwise. But it's not necessarily that difficult, because when you start digging into the problem, you start understanding who's actually doing anything here. And then you just start proactively reaching out to people and follow leads. Ask your colleagues and friends and whatever. I mean, just be really proactive and eventually you will find good leads. And those leads will lead to other leads, because once you crack the shell of that community, then you start finding more people.
So it's mostly like getting the first one to maybe enter the domain and then trying to continue from that branch over.
Yeah, and legwork basically.
All right. From Sana, what are the challenges you faced while conducting co-creation activities activity? Maybe things to consider the researcher when we are planning to conduct one next time.
Okay, recruiting is always an issue because if you recruit, you can consciously recruit so that you get certain results. I mean, that's a nasty secret about research. In our case, again, it depends on who we are trying to recruit. How specific is your need? Usually, I would say that it's think about your recruitment criteria, and that will then tell you how difficult it is. In our case, because we were dealing with minors, you end up with certain layers of legislation that you need to go through, which is an additional. But for example, if you were going to do work with inmates in a prison, you would have a completely different set of problems. So, but yeah, again, try to figure out where do these people live in the sense of like where do they gather, and go there and start cracking the shell open. Don't be afraid to ask. Appearing more stupid than you really are is really valuable as a researcher. So don't be afraid to look stupid and ask idiotic questions.
I love that advice. I think is the main nature sometimes of research is like assuming that you don't know things and that trying to crack them and see what are my hypotheses, assumptions that are wrong, and so on. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And maybe the last question. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
It's also, I mean, a couple of examples that I showed were really problematic from a research methodological point of view because it was mostly designers researching their own work, which is always a no-no. You should never do that.
Correct.
But in some cases you are forced to do that, and then it's really difficult to be quiet and listen. So that's something that you really, if it's a small team and you are this kind of dual role, then you really have to do your utmost not to test your own work, but get somebody else to do that.
All right, and heading to the maybe last question for today. Did you ever have any remote co-creation sessions? If so, how did you adapt the content to this scenario?
Yeah, at least in these COVID times, remote methods are something that's really worth sharing. But I don't think I've ever had kind of a remote in this kind of telepresence way, remote co-creation system. We had a lot of kind of like removed sessions. For example, when we were in the companies where you're able to do international work, we had a lot of projects where we did the same study in multiple locations at the same time by creating a very kind of like clear research protocol. These are the things you should be doing. These are the methods you should use to document. And this was both for ethnographic work or for kind of like workshops or that kind of stuff, which is really valuable because, and even without, even with completely different teams, so that usually you have one person present in all the sessions or whatever, so you maintain this. But I think it is quite possible to do kind of like, if you do good enough guidance, you're able to do stuff remotely in the sense that you're not there. But this kind of co-creation via Zoom, well, they are okay. Again, it depends on the literacy, the tech literacy of your. But designers, for example, do a lot of co-creation using Jamboard or Miro or other kind of like online whiteboard kind of tools. But it is a tech literacy issue when you talk about normal kind of a woman from the street kind of thing.
Indeed. All right, I think those were mainly the questions. Maybe just a quite interesting one. How can one find a job working on such an interesting projects or social issues as a UX researcher? If you have any tips for our audience here.
Yes, go and work in a design agency. In the sense that, okay, there are several different kinds of roles that you can have, and I was really fortunate to work in a massive international company that had massive war chests full of money. And you could do, for example, I've been sitting in Tokyo metro for days looking at how people spend time, and I was getting paid for that. So you can have really bizarre projects which ultimately end up going nowhere. So if you're able to work for a big company like Google or whatever, you might end up in a situation where you're in the design or research department and you get all these really interesting projects. If you work in a small design agency that's or research agency that's doing strategic work, and you have a good sales department, you might get involved in this higher level kind of exploratory kind of like problem setting works, and get to do a lot of this kind of world healing stuff. Again, the problem is that it usually never goes anywhere because it's some design agency stuff and not the company's own work. But it is really difficult. Hopefully, I think the world is changing in the sense that companies do realize that they need to be more ethical and they need to take more the real needs of the people into account. So I think it's more likely that you get to do that than in the past. So I don't know. I mean, if you're stuck in a work that you don't get that kind of ethical or kind of meaningful stuff out of, change jobs. UX people generally can find work. So, by the way, this is one of the, okay, last point. This is given to us by a design talker once. If you're stuck in a job that you don't enjoy, you're making a double karma mistake. Because first of all, you're making your own life miserable by doing a work you don't want to do. But secondly, you're taking that job away from somebody who could actually enjoy it. So be brave and look bravely for worthwhile problems to solve.
Lovely ending. I'm not sure we could have ended it in any better note than that. So tremendous work that you have done and also what you share with us today. Thank you so much on behalf of everybody and our team as well for being present here today and sharing all your 20 more years of experience in this very insightful and valuable work. So Akseli, a pleasure to have you here today with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right, I'm going to share now my screen so that, let me know if you can see, so that we kind of wrap up a bit what we have discussed today. We definitely hope that we all enjoyed the talks tonight from our great speakers, from Sonia and Akseli today. And we hope you took your notes and found some interesting stuff to share from research projects, from societal issues, from loving your day-to-day job, and so on. So I hope this event was helpful for you. And we actually have a note here. We're almost done, but we still have some things to share with you. But before you leave and before we actually share those things, we will kindly ask you to fill in quickly, in a few minutes, this feedback form that Margarita will share on the chat. And this will help us tremendously so that we can improve the next events, and also maybe we can shape the community better in the following in the future. So please, let's take maybe a few minutes, 1-2 minutes to fill in the feedback form, and we'll continue afterwards with few more news related to our community and next steps after these wonderful talks. So yeah, let's take 1-2 minutes to do that, please.
Okay, I think we have a technical problem. Yes. There are technical problems always. So I try to fix it very quickly. Okay. So please, please, please bear with me. Okay. Shorten URL. collect. Okay. So maybe I think we cannot fix a technical problem quickly, apparently. Can you try now again, please? Sharing to everyone. I'm sharing another link, please. Yes. If you try now and if it doesn't work, no. Okay, so we will have to find out a different way. Sorry for that. We go to the next slide.
All right, we will maybe share afterwards the survey to you, and we kindly ask you to fill it in afterwards after the event. There's also plenty of time afterwards. All right, now what we want to mention is that we want to continue the research saga, and we have a next event that we are thinking about, which is Numbers Behind the Scene, Quantitative Research in Practice. And if you want to speak yourself, if you are an expert in the area, or you want to mention a couple of projects that you had related to this topic about quantitative research, or know any other speakers from your community, please let us know. Let us know via Slack, via all the other means that Margarita has shared with you in the chat. And yeah, that's how we are actually evolving, and we are building our next event. So we would appreciate that a lot. And before summing up, just some quick updates about what is happening in our UXL community. We have designcareer.com, where Paulo has launched a platform for recruiting or for people who are looking for a job. Those are the ones who should definitely check it out. And then there is the next initiative, Human the Designer podcast, from UXL members, Ives and Angelos, in Joint Frontiers. So they are talking of how design work can be improved responsibly, ethically, and how it can shape the world and design that can help as an intrinsically political tool. So make sure that you check them. We will share them also with you now. And feel free to also reach those guys, both Paulo, Ives, and Angelos, if you want to collaborate or know more about these initiatives. So you can visit the web pages to read some content on those topics. And last thing to share is that UXL are not the only design community in Helsinki. You can definitely find even more at designhell.com. So if you are interested and if you want to learn more about this, make sure that you enter the link and read what is happening in the designers community in Helsinki. All right, so that was mostly it. We are now finishing our event. We are very thankful to you for staying with us all this time, especially because it's quite a mid-week day of work. Then we are all aware about the effort also that it makes to be with us. So we really hope that you have enjoyed the talks. I know for sure that we in the team have a lot. And we would like to huge thanks to our speakers as well, Sonia and Exeli, for having the pleasure to be with us tonight. So thank you, that was amazing. We learned a lot about here, and that was great work that you have shared with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you all. If you do have any topics that you'd like to talk to the community, reach out to us and we'll be here. Have a wonderful evening all.
Yes,
take care.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you,
Axeli. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice
Thank you so
evening.
much.
You too, thank you.